Tomorrow, 19-year-old Damien Echols' attorneys will file with the court the transcripts from Echols' trial, more than 4,000 pages of testimony. That will set in motion the appeals process that Echols believes will lead to the overturning of his conviction and sentence.
Damien Echols still walks, even though 4 years ago he was sentenced to die.
Hope this works?
Yeah, but I don't think it will.
Why don't you think it'll work?
Same judge.
His appeals have been denied time and time and time again.
Now today, defense attorneys did make a request that Judge David Burnett be recused from hearing these cases, but that motion was quickly denied by the judge.
I was saying with police rumors.
Where then it does the West Memphis prison.
Rumors begin.
Look inside there, there's not a soul.
Hopefully it's my last case.
I just want the truth.
Satanic.
I want the hatred.
And I hate these things.
A forensic pathologist, a bite mark expert, a criminal profiler, even a human blood and body fluid stain specialist brought their expertise here to the law school at the University of Arkansas in Little Rock in hopes of proving why the defense team for convicted killer Damien Echols says he is innocent.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Dennis Reardon. We represent petitioner Damien Echols in the Eastern District of Arkansas here in Little Rock, arising out of the 1994 trials of 3 teenagers who were tried and convicted for the murders of 3 8-year-old boys. And we are here today to discuss the evidence that establishes that no reasonable juror would convict Damien Echols, essentially knowing what we know today. The heart of this presentation is 4 experts who we will be calling today, who provided the core of the new evidence before the district court. They are Werner Spitz, probably the country's leading forensic pathologist, certainly the author of the Bible of forensic pathology. Richard Souvron, renowned forensic odontologist, who was the key witness for the prosecution in convicting Ted Bundy. Tom Fedor, who is a DNA expert to discuss the new DNA evidence, and John Douglas, who headed the criminal analysis unit of the FBI for 25 years.
As some of you know, a critical prosecution theory at the 1994 trials was that the defendants used a survival knife to inflict most of the injuries on these victims, and that they used the knife before the children died.
Good morning. I analyzed a lot of pictures. I analyzed a lot of written material. It is my opinion, or the following are my opinions. Injuries on the body surface of all the 3 victims, 3 boys, including the emasculation of Chris Byers, were produced by animals after death. When a dog or other carnivorous animal attacks a body after death or before death sometimes, they scrape the body. They move their claws on the body and try to bring the body closer to them. They do this several times. And you have here 2 of the victims that have the same identical injury. There were obvious claw marks. the spacing and the configuration of those injuries is not compatible with a serrated knife such as this, or, for that matter, any knife.
Over a period of time, our understanding of what actually happened has changed. What we know now is that the lawyers on the case hadn't gone to the crime laboratory and looked meticulously through all of the laboratory's notebooks of what was done out at the crime scene. The crime scene techs recovered a bunch of animal hair.
There's no possible way this could have been done with this knife. Animals do this. This is what happens to a body that's dumped in a wooded area, in the woods, in a creek, in a swamp. This is what you're going to get. Dog, coyote, fox, possum. I've seen all of those. It's a carnivore. Could it be turtles that have done this? Aquatic crabs, for instance. Sure. Anything that would eat flesh is what did this.
Is it a coincidence? This knife is found in the lake, hidden behind Jason Baldwin's house.
I think all of you saw the experiment with the grapefruit.
A cut in an open space, cut in an open space.
And you don't have to be a rocket scientist or a forensic dentist or anything else to look at that serrations on the back of that knife and see these marks on these two human beings and saying that back end of that knife made these marks. I mean, give me a break. That is the most ridiculous statement that I've ever heard anybody make. And to sell that to a jury is unconscionable.
I think the knife that was in the courtroom was the one that was used on the buyer's boy. I still think that.
In 2001, Arkansas, like a lot of other states, passed a statute that allows convicted criminal defendants to challenge their convictions with new DNA evidence that shows them to be actually innocent. Under that state statute, relevant items from the crime scene in this case were tested at a laboratory chosen by the prosecution, and that's Bodie Laboratories in Virginia. In late 2005, Bodie issued its first report showing DNA profiles of genetic material found on the victims and on other pieces of evidence from the crime scene. In the end, none of the Bodie reports could link any of the DNA provided by the defendants to the victims or to the crime scene. Our investigators obtaining DNA samples in the form of hair, cigarette butts, oral swabs from people who had some connection to the events. These included samples from several people, including Stephen Branch's stepfather, Terry Hobbs. We gave all these samples to Thomas Fedor, who's here today. He's an independent forensic serologist. The result of that analysis in May 2007 showed that a hair from a ligature used to tie up Michael Moore could be associated with Terry Hobbs.
Is it possible, Mr. Hobbs, that that was your hair?
Sure. It was his son, Stephen Branch, who was murdered, and he's had to deal with this for the last 15 years.
Over the course of time, it seems that over and over again, it's been different family members who have popped up as kind of being suspects in this case. And I have to ask, is there really significant enough DNA evidence that could point to Terry Hobbs?
My personal opinion is I don't think that hair evidence would be enough to convict Mr. Hobbs or anybody in a similar situation, because it's simply not strong enough. The percentages that I gave of people who could be the source of those hairs are 1.5% of the population. That's not particularly strong evidence, and especially in the context of what most people are accustomed to with DNA testing.
So just to clarify, the DNA evidence, the point of bringing it up isn't to say that Hobbs did it, but it's just to say one could think it might be more likely that Hobbs would have done it versus Damien, because there's no evidence there at all.
The last thing as defense lawyers we would intend to do is indict and convict someone beyond a reasonable doubt of this case. The evidence as to Hobbs, I don't think should be viewed that way, but is it evidence that would lead any reasonable juror to acquit Damien Echols? Yes, it would.
Defense attorneys announced they had new DNA evidence that shows no trace of Echols or the other defendants at the crime scene. Even some of the victims' relatives who initially agreed with the verdicts
That's why all three of them are punks. Punks!
now think the men in jail are innocent.
I would like to see another trial, give them a fair trial, present the evidence that really wasn't presented in the other trials, and if they're guilty, so be it, that's where they stay, but if they're not, God, don't put somebody to death because, you know, oops.
In the early 1970s and 80s, we began to see at the FBI Academy police officers coming in from around the world, and the cops were kind of throwing around words like ritual and using it interchangeably with satanic crimes. We did a close evaluation. We didn't see one. We didn't see one case.
The program is designed to help law enforcement officers better understand satanic cults.
When I was in the Bureau, we came up with a crime classification manual we designed. We considered satanic because these cops were bringing back these cases to us, satanic murders.
Another area that you might find satanic ritual carving is in the stomach area.
This is not a satanic, this is not the ritual, it's a murder. It's a murder maybe by one crazy guy, but if you call this satanic, we could just have just as many murders where a Bible is left there. Does that make it a Christian murder? It's a Bible? I mean, no, it's nuts. It's just one crazy person.
This is not a homicide either, perpetrated by a stranger. The person responsible for this crime knew these victims and knew these victims relatively well. The question I'd ask myself is, if the motivation is murder, if the initial intent is murder, go ahead and kill. Why did the subject decide to tie up the victims after stripping them down naked? I believe the initial intent in my analysis was not to kill, but was to taunt and to punish these individuals. I saw criminal sophistication at the crime scene, the tying of the wrists to the ankles. I searched cases all over the world. I couldn't come up with similar types of cases.
We came outside to go to church at 6:30, but I saw Terry coming down the sidewalk here, coming this direction, and he was calling for Stephen to come back down to their house.
Last time we saw him was about 6:30 yesterday evening.
And give me your name.
My name's Mark Byers.
We're looking at somebody who has been violent in the past, who's violent now, at the time this crime was perpetrated, and would also be violent in the future.
Stevie had a belt mark on him, and I asked Pam who whipped him. I thought maybe she had, and she said Terry did. She didn't want to tell me at first, but she finally told me.
Problems began when Mark spanked the Kingsbury's 5-year-old.
I took the fly swatter and I just the plastic end, just on the back of his blue jeans. And I said, now you get home, you've been a bad boy.
The person responsible for this crime can look at you right in the eye, can look at a camera and say that I didn't do it.
Mr. Hobbs, do you feel like that the attorneys are accusing you of this crime?
The answer to that would be no.
Because of his psychopathic personality, there is no remorse. Anyone who perpetrates a crime like this and leaves the victims like this in this condition, he's only concerned about himself.
What was your intent when you spanked him? Was it your intent to hurt him?
Oh, no, sir.
To discipline him? Did you ever hurt him?
No, sir.
You can put him on the polygraph, he'll pass the polygraph, particularly if it's 14 years later.
This was probably the first crowdsourced criminal investigation in history, is about the only way to describe it. The case was supposedly solved. If it was an open case, the West Memphis police wouldn't be required to make available documents. The West Memphis police put together an incredibly large investigation, even if a lot of it was nonsense and rumors. So we could take on the case. We could begin to ask the questions. We could look at Jesse's confession and we could say, wait a second, what did he really say compared to what he was claimed to have said?
Right from the very start, after Jesse Misskelley made his statement to police, it was tape recorded and it was transcribed, and then it was immediately leaked to the commercial appeal.
Graphic details have already been printed in today's commercial appeal. Jesse Misskelley Jr. is one of 3 of the murder suspects.
I don't believe it. He's not that type of boy.
Misskelley Sr. disputes a confession allegedly made by his son and quoted in today's newspaper. The paper doesn't mention how it obtained young Misskelley's statement.
I read the confession on the front page of the Memphis Commercial Appeal just like everybody else did, and it seemed like it happened.
When we were appointed by the court in 1993, we thought
that it wasn't going to be a jury trial. We thought it was going to be a plea. As I got deeper into the case and looked at things, they just didn't start making sense. Miss Kelly's versions of what happened changed wildly, and he couldn't get the story right every time or any time.
A jury takes an oath to base their verdicts only on the evidence that comes before them. And they're not to consider anything other than the evidence that comes from the witness stand, the exhibits that are introduced into evidence. And if they violate that oath, it's a very, very serious matter.
Lori Davis, wife of Damien Echols, spoke for the first time about a new defense allegation of jury misconduct in the trial of the West Memphis Three. Davis says the jury foreman contacted an attorney during the trial 15 years ago.
We know from a lawyer who has now submitted some paperwork to the court, who talked to that jury foreman and who became aware that the jury foreman was considering some information that the jury foreman shouldn't have been considering.
In the last couple of years, quite fortuitously, and this is the sort of fortune that can save a man's life, we have found that the jury put up big sheets of factors that they considered in convicting Echols and Baldwin. And they've been kept in evidence. And here the Echols one is. No one has really asked what that might be. Why was it crossed out? Who crossed it out? One of the jurors had copied a facsimile of that list into her notebook. The crossed out item is the Jesse Miss Kelly testimony.
What we now know is that, in fact, Jesse Miss Kelly's statements played a pretty major part in the way that the jury in the Echols and Baldwin case came to understand the case and came to have confidence in the notion that they should convict, which is wrong.
You know, people always ask us things about what we're going to do whenever I'm out, whenever we're together. And we do talk about that. For Lori and I, life isn't something that will happen one day down the road. You know, we're together now. We're not just in a state of suspended animation waiting.
A judge says no to new trial.
Judge Burnett made it clear that the DNA evidence isn't enough for a new trial or to overturn the conviction.
David Burnett wouldn't hear the new evidence. He just denied it without even hearing it.
It's not unusual for post-conviction motions to be made in front of the judge that originally heard the trial. And the theory behind that is that the judge who originally heard the trial saw all the witnesses testify and is in the best position to evaluate the new evidence.
I believe this witness is requested not to be photographed.
I heard Damien Echols say that he killed the 3 boys.
What did he say before that?
I don't know.
What did he say after that?
I don't know.
And how close were you to him?
I wasn't close.
You think he was kind of weird or something?
Yes, sir, because he was dressed all in black and his hair was jet black and long.
Or I don't know exactly how many kids. He just said he dismembered them. He sucked the blood from the penis and the scrotum and put the balls in his mouth.
I mean, I could understand why he would never want to see me again or talk to me again, but I'm just telling him right now that I'm sorry.
But all of us are victims of bias that we don't even understand or know.
Pure black, looking clear, my work is soon done here. Try getting back from me that which used to be. That is off a Metallica tape called Injustice for All. It talks about how warped the court systems are, and stuff like that.
My life would have been a lot simpler if I hadn't been involved in that case, I think. I had to fool with it for 18 years and get beaten over the head by folks that were opposed to what happened. But I didn't pick and choose. I just took what came down the pike. All of this hoopla about newly discovered evidence. There is no newly discovered evidence. All of the evidence that was found originally at the trial scene.